My name is Sarah. I am 45 years old, and I never thought a simple bowl of soup would rewrite the entire course of my life until the day my billionaire boss, a man known for his ruthless business tactics, stood in front of my tiny office cubicle with tears streaming down his face. I was just a regular administrative assistant, drowning in debt and terrified of being fired during the upcoming company layoffs. When he called me into the executive suite that morning, my heart was hammering against my ribs, convinced I was about to lose everything I had worked so hard for. But instead of handing me a termination letter, he pulled out a faded, moth-eaten red woolen scarf from his expensive briefcase. The moment I saw that scarf, all the air left my lungs. The sterile walls of the corporate office melted away, and suddenly I was back in the brutal Chicago winter 20 years ago, staring into the desperate, frost-bitten eyes of a starving little boy I had found shivering in the snow. Before I tell you how a freezing child from the streets ended up becoming the most powerful man I know, and what exactly he did when he finally found me, I want to pause for a quick second. I love knowing how far these stories travel, so please tell me in the comments, from which city or state are you listening to this right now? It always amazes me how connected we all are. Now, to truly understand the weight of what happened in that executive office, I need to take you back to the beginning, to a time when I was just trying to survive my own desperate reality. It was the winter of 2004, and I was 25 years old, working double shifts at a rundown diner on the outskirts of Chicago. I was completely alone in the world, having lost my parents a few years prior, and every single day was a battle just to keep the heat on in my tiny apartment. The wind chill that December was historic, the kind of cold that bites right through your bones and makes it hurt just to breathe. I was working the closing shift, and my manager at the time, a grumpy man named Marcus, was barking orders at me to take out the trash before locking up. Marcus was the kind of boss who counted every penny and would dock your pay if you accidentally dropped a plate. I wrapped my coat tightly around myself, grabbed the heavy black garbage bags, and pushed through the back door into the freezing alleyway. The snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets, and the wind howled down the brick corridor. As I heaved the bags into the dumpster, I heard a faint rustling sound coming from a pile of discarded cardboard boxes huddled against the brick wall. At first, I thought it was a stray dog looking for scraps. I took a step closer, squinting through the blinding snow, and my heart dropped into my stomach. It was not a dog. It was a child. He was curled into a tight ball, his knees tucked under his chin, trying to make himself as small as possible. He was wearing nothing but a thin, torn long-sleeve shirt and jeans that were stiff with ice. He did not even have a jacket, and his worn-out sneakers were soaked through. I dropped to my knees beside him, the freezing snow soaking through my own pants, and gently touched his shoulder. He flinched violently, his head snapping up to look at me. I will never forget the look in his eyes. It was a mixture of pure terror and absolute exhaustion. His lips were a terrifying shade of blue, and his skin was pale as a ghost. He was shaking so hard that his teeth were audibly chattering. I asked him where his parents were, but he just stared at me, too cold to even form words. Every maternal instinct I did not even know I possessed flared up in that exact second. I knew if I left him out there for another hour, he would not survive the night. I grabbed his icy hand and pulled him up. He was so weak, his legs gave out, and I had to practically carry him inside through the back door. I snuck him into the small employee break room, terrified that Marcus would catch me. Marcus had a strict policy against letting homeless people into the diner, and he would have fired me on the spot. I sat the boy down on a milk crate next to the radiator and grabbed a thick blanket from my locker, wrapping it around his trembling shoulders. I then rushed into the kitchen, grabbed a large bowl, and filled it to the brim with the hottest, thickest chicken noodle soup we had left over from the dinner rush. I also toasted some thick slices of bread and slathered them in butter. When I brought the tray back to the break room, the boy looked at the food as if it were a mirage. He started eating so fast I was afraid he was going to choke. I sat on the floor across from him, watching the color slowly return to his cheeks. Once he had scraped the bowl completely clean, I asked him for his name. He looked down at his shoes and whispered that his name was Leo, and he was 12 years old. He told me he had run away from a terrible foster home where he was locked in a closet for days at a time. The system had failed him, and he preferred taking his chances on the freezing streets of Chicago over going back to that nightmare. My heart shattered into a million pieces. I was struggling, yes, but I had a roof over my head and food in my stomach. Looking at Leo, I realized how incredibly fragile life could be. I knew I could not take him home with me, as my apartment was just a rented room in a boarding house that did not allow guests, let alone children. But I also knew I could not throw him back out into the snow. For the next 3 nights, I managed to hide Leo in the diner. During the day, he would hide in the warm boiler room in the basement, where Marcus never went. At night, after closing, I would sneak him food, hot chocolate, and whatever warm clothes I could afford from the thrift store down the street. It was during those late-night hours that we really connected. We would sit on the floor of the break room, and I would tell him stories about my dreams of one day going back to school, while he told me about his fascination with numbers and how he wanted to build big things when he grew up. On the 4th night, I gave him my own red woolen scarf. It was the only thing I had left from my late mother, but seeing him shiver when the drafts came through the old building, I knew he needed it more than I did. I wrapped it around his neck and told him to never lose hope. But on the 5th morning, when I came in for my early shift and went down to the boiler room to bring him breakfast, the room was empty. Panic seized my chest. I searched the entire building, the alleyway, the nearby streets, calling his name until my voice went hoarse. He was just gone. Later that day, I overheard a police officer talking to Marcus, mentioning that there had been a sweep of the neighborhood the night before, and several runaway kids had been picked up by Child Protective Services. I was devastated. I cried in the bathroom for an hour, praying that wherever they took him, it was better than the streets and better than his last foster home. For months, I looked for his face in the crowds, hoping to see that red scarf, but Chicago is a massive city, and Leo had vanished into the system like a ghost. The years rolled by, and life did not get any easier. I met a wonderful man, fell in love, and we had a beautiful daughter named Maya. For a brief moment, I truly thought I had finally found my happy ending. But my husband passed away in a tragic car accident when Maya was only 2 years old, leaving me a single mother with a mountain of medical bills and a shattered heart. The grief was unbearable, but I had a little girl depending on me for her survival. I packed away my sorrow and went back to work. I left the diner and started working 2 jobs, cleaning houses during the day and doing data entry at night. Every single dollar went into keeping a roof over our heads. It was a grueling, exhausting existence. There were nights I would sit at my kitchen table at 2 a.m, staring at a stack of past due utility bills, crying silently so I would not wake Maya. The exhaustion was a deep, bone-weary emotional drain. But bit by bit, we survived. By the time I turned 40, I managed to land a stable job as an administrative assistant at a large financial firm downtown. It came with decent health insurance and a steady paycheck. It felt like I could finally breathe. I made a close friend there, a woman named Brenda, who was 46 years old. Brenda sat in the cubicle next to mine, and we became each other's lifelines in the high-stress corporate environment, sharing lunches and complaining about management. Fast forward to the present. I was now 45, and my daughter Maya was 18, about to graduate high school. She was a brilliant student, straight A's, and had just been accepted into her dream university. We were overjoyed, celebrating in our small apartment with cheap pizza. But the joy was quickly overshadowed by the crushing reality of the tuition costs. Even with her partial scholarship, the remaining balance was astronomical. I had exhausted my meager savings just on application fees and books. I was losing sleep, pacing the floor at night, trying to figure out how to take out loans with my bad credit. I felt like a failure as a mother. Here she was, doing everything right, and I could not give her the future she deserved. To make matters worse, our firm had just been bought out by a massive conglomerate, and rumors of layoffs were spreading like wildfire. The new CEO was a notoriously ruthless young billionaire named Mr. Sterling. The financial blogs painted him as a cold, calculating machine who gutted staff for profit. When he officially arrived at the office, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. He marched straight into the corner executive suite without looking at anyone. For the next 3 days, the layoffs intensified. Entire departments were wiped out. Brenda and I would sit in the break room, watching our colleagues get called into human resources, never to return. Brenda was a nervous wreck, and I tried to stay strong for her, but my stomach was tied in knots. I knew that if I lost this job, Maya would not go to college. Then, on a Thursday morning, the notification popped up on my computer screen, an email directly from the executive assistant of Mr. Sterling. I was requested to report to the top floor immediately. My blood ran cold. The air in my lungs just vanished. Brenda looked over my partition, her eyes wide with sympathy and fear. She whispered that she was so sorry, offering to help me pack my boxes when I got back. I nodded numbly, unable to speak. I stood up, my legs feeling like they were made of lead, and smoothed down my cheap blazer. The walk to the elevator felt like a death march. Every step echoed in my ears. I thought about Maya, about her college dreams crumbling to dust. I thought about the bills piled up on my kitchen counter. I was fighting back tears before the elevator doors even opened on the top floor. I stepped out onto the thick, plush carpet of the executive level. The silence up there was intimidating, a stark contrast to the chaotic noise of the floor below. The CEO's assistant, a severe-looking woman, pointed me toward the heavy oak doors without saying a word. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands, and knocked softly. A deep voice told me to enter. I pushed the door open and stepped into the massive, sunlit office. The view of the Chicago skyline was breathtaking, but I could not focus on it. Mr. Sterling was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to me, looking out over the city. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it in the quiet room. I stood there awkwardly, clutching my hands together, waiting for him to turn around and destroy my life. He finally turned slowly, holding a thick file folder in his hands. He was 32 years old, with sharp features, dark hair, and intense, piercing eyes that seemed to look right through me. He walked over to his massive mahogany desk and tossed the file down. He looked at me for a long, agonizing moment without speaking. The silence was unbearable. Finally, I cleared my throat and introduced myself, stating my name and my position, trying desperately to keep my voice from trembling. I told him I knew why I was there, and that I just wanted to say I had always worked hard for the company. I was rambling, driven by pure anxiety, pleading with him to reconsider, explaining that I was a single mother and my daughter was about to start college. I abandoned all my professional pride because I was desperate. He raised a hand, stopping my frantic speech. He took a step closer, bypassing the desk entirely, and stood just a few feet away from me. His intense gaze softened in a way that completely confused me. The cold, ruthless billionaire I had read about seemed to vanish, replaced by someone entirely different. He asked me, in a very quiet, almost fragile voice, if I had ever worked at a diner on the south side of the city 20 years ago. The question was so unexpected, so completely out of context, that my brain short-circuited. I stopped crying and stared at him, blinking in confusion. I slowly nodded, asking him how he could possibly know that. The firm had no record of my employment history going that far back. He did not answer me immediately. Instead, he reached into his briefcase, which was resting on a side table. That is when he pulled it out. The faded, moth-eaten red woolen scarf. He held it in his hands as if it were made of solid gold. The moment my eyes locked onto that familiar fabric, the ground beneath me felt like it shifted. The memories crashed over me like a tidal wave. The freezing alley, the the snow, the shivering boy by the dumpster, the hot soup in the break room. I looked from the scarf up to his face, really looking at him this time. Behind the sharp jawline in the expensive suit, I saw the eyes, the exact same eyes of the terrified 12-year-old boy I had pulled out of the snow. I gasped, taking a step back, my hand flying to cover my mouth. I whispered his name, Leo.
The sound of his name hanging in the air broke whatever dam was holding him together. The ruthless billionaire, the man who was firing hundreds of people without batting an eye, completely broke down. Tears spilled over his eyelashes and streamed down his cheeks. He took a step forward and wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into a crushing hug. I was completely frozen in shock, but then I felt his shoulders shaking, and I slowly wrapped my arms around him too, patting his back, just like I had done in that dingy break room 2 decades ago. When he finally pulled back, he wiped his face with the back of his hand, laughing through his tears. He told me that after he disappeared that morning, he had been placed in a group home, but the warmth of my kindness and the scarf I had given him kept him going. He said I was the first adult who had ever looked at him as a human being.
He explained that he had kept the scarf with him through every foster home, every challenge, every lonely night. He had worked relentlessly, using his obsession with numbers to get a scholarship, eventually building his own financial empire from the ground up. But he had never stopped looking for me. He had hired private investigators over the years, but because I had changed my last name when I got married and then moved around so much after my husband died, I had been impossible to track down. It was only when his company acquired our firm and he insisted on personally reviewing the files of every employee to look for inefficiencies that he recognized my photo and my first name in the human resources database. He said he could not believe it when he saw my face on the screen. He had found his guardian angel. I was crying freely now, completely overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. I told him I had thought about him so often that I had worried he had not survived that winter. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile, and walked back to his desk. He picked up the file folder he had tossed down earlier and handed it to me. I opened it with trembling fingers. It was not a termination letter. It was a promotion contract. He was making me the director of operations for his personal philanthropic foundation, a charity he had started to help homeless youth in Chicago. The salary listed on the paper was more than I had ever dreamed of making in a lifetime. It was enough to pay off all my debts in a single month. Tucked behind the contract was a certified check covering Maya's 4 years of college tuition in full. I dropped the folder on the desk and covered my face, sobbing uncontrollably. I tried to refuse, telling him it was too much, that I only gave him a bowl of soup and an old scarf, but Leo grabbed my hands gently and looked me straight in the eyes. He told me that to him, it was not just soup and a scarf. It was life. It was hope. He said he owed everything he had built to the fact that I did not leave him to freeze in that alleyway. He insisted that I accept the job and the tuition money, not as a gift, but as payment for a debt that was 20 years overdue. He wanted me to run his foundation because he knew I had the exact heart and compassion needed to help kids who were just like him. I looked at the contract, then at Leo, and realized that my life of struggling was finally over. When I walked back down to my floor, Brenda jumped out of her chair, ready to comfort me, but when she saw the look on my face, she stopped dead in her tracks. I could not even speak. I just hugged her tight, laughing and crying at the same time. The news of my promotion shocked the entire office, but I did not care about the whispers. That evening, I went home and showed Maya the check for her college tuition. We sat on the floor of our tiny living room, holding each other and crying tears of pure joy and relief. The heavy, suffocating weight of poverty that had been crushing my chest for 20 years simply vanished. We were safe. Maya was going to get the education she deserved, and I was going to spend the rest of my career helping kids who were lost in the dark, just like Leo once was. Looking back, the biggest lesson I learned from all of this is that kindness is never truly wasted. You might never see the harvest of the seeds you plant, but sometimes when you are at your lowest point, starving for a miracle, the universe sends back the very person you saved, ready to save you in return. It makes me wonder about all the small interactions we have every day and how much power we hold to change the trajectory of someone's life without even realizing it. If you saw a freezing child in an alley, knowing you could lose your job just for helping them, would you do the same thing in my place? I would love to read your honest thoughts in the comments. Until the next story.